All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. This is January 19th, and as with every meeting, we start with our mandate and our statement of purpose and values. The Standing Committee on Public Accounts is charged with matters concerning the public accounts of the province, the annual report of the Auditor General, and fiscal management. The Standing Committee on Public Accounts is dedicated to improving public administration in partnership with the Auditor General. The committee examines the administration of government policy, not the merits of it. The committee strives to achieve consensus in its decisions whenever possible. Members take a nonpartisan approach to the work of the committee. So I'd like to welcome everybody here today. For members, we have Robert Henderson, Sydney McEwen, Corey Deagle, Gordon McNeely, and Carla Bernard. Welcome, everyone. And with that, I will ask for a motion to adopt the agenda. Carla, thank you. And today with us, we have members from the Office of the Auditor General. We have Darren Noonan, he's the Auditor General, and we have Sherry Griffin, who is the Audit Director. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you, because the committee just sent out a letter a very short time ago, so I want to express our appreciation for your prompt response and making time to come in to see and work with us on such a quick turnaround. I appreciate that. And so as you would know, there was a number of items that we had sent out that we'd like to just have an update or discuss with you. And I think you brought a presentation today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you. And thank you for being here.
Okay, well, thanks for having us. Sherry's going to kind of control the slide presentation and maybe answer a few questions if you get into specifics on our COVID work. And before I start, I did watch your planning session on January 5th, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
And Ryan had sent me the agenda for last week's meeting, and I knew you wanted to call me in, so I said, do they want me in? So I was preparing in advance of the letter, so.
Great.
Did you talk to her?
I'm a bit more proactive.
Sorry.
That's okay. So the first thing, not in the order maybe that you got in your letter to us, but I put my presentation together. The first thing I wanted to talk about in your discussions were the blue books, to kind of get an update on where we were. At your planning meeting, you were wondering if we were still on track for January 31st. As you're aware, Volume 1 was issued on Friday. Volumes 2 and 3, they're anticipated to be out by the end of the month. But I just wanted to clarify that, so the blue books are produced by the Controller's Office and the Minister and the Department of Finance. We issue our audit report on the consolidated statements, and they include that in their blue books. But the blue books are typically their responsibility to get them put together. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that, because it seemed like there might have been some confusion that it was us that was putting the blue books together, but it's not our office.
Okay, perfect.
Next slide. So just to give you an update, so one of the contentious issues with the blue books are volumes 2 and 3, and not all of the entities being included in the blue books. So I did have a discussion with Judy, the controller, about including unaudited financial statements in the blue book. So at least something was reported. And the reason why I did that is we rely on the unaudited statements ourselves. We do additional work when they're still unaudited, because we need to get assurance ourselves that what we're reporting on is accurate. So I think the fact of putting unaudited financial statements in the blue books wouldn't necessarily take away from the blue books. But I don't think they're going to do that this year. And the other thing that came up in those discussions with Judy was that they are working on a digital platform to have the blue books electronically, so that, for example, if the blue books get issued in January, and let's say there's 5 entities that are not in the blue book, the hard printed copy, Well, as those statements do become audited, they'll be available on the digital platform so that eventually they'll all be in the proper Blue Book year, whereas now they don't get seen.
Right.
So I think that's a good thing for the Controller's Office to be doing.
Okay.
So financial statement reporting deadlines. So I just wanted to, I guess, give the committee an idea of what's involved in meeting that 90-day reporting requirement. And essentially, for our office to complete our work, we need approximately 60 days. And that starts from doing our field work and documentation. If we have any questions for the client, so we have to ask those questions to the client, they need to respond to us. Typically, there's 2 or 3 back and forths on questions. So by the time we get everything to our satisfaction, get a draft audit report to the client, they get approval from the board, get back to us to finalize, it just, through time, it takes about 60 days. So, just go back, Sherry, for 1 sec. So I think it's, part of the reason why the deadlines aren't met is because the files just don't get to us within 30, even 45 days is doable. But if they don't get to us within that time period, it's very difficult to get them done in a timely manner. So I just wanted to kind of clarify. Sometimes some of the entities, they'll get us the statements the end of May or even June and kind of wash their hands of it and say, okay, the auditor has it now, but it takes time once we do get it, so.
So can I just, a quick question, 60 days, so what do you work back from, so what date, that's not the October 31st date, is it? What is that, you needed 60 days in advance of what date?
Well, public accounts is a little different, but this
Right.
would be for the Crown Corps they're mandated to be issued by June 30th.
Okay.
So for March 31st, April 30th would be kind of the ideal date for us to have the complete working paper file.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Any other?
Okay. So the next slide, this is a list of all of the entities that we report on within our office, other than public accounts. So Health PEI has a March 31st year end, and typically they always meet their deadline of June 30th. The PEI Advisory Council on the Status of Women, their fiscal year end is March 31st, and their financial statements are typically issued by June 30th, but sometimes they don't get issued on time. And typically that's not an issue with the client. It usually falls back on our office. And the reason why that is the legislation surrounding the status of women is, I think the audit, it's worded so that their books may be audited from time to time by the Auditor General, so there's no kind of legislated date. So it sometimes can take a backseat to some of those other ones that are legislated. Mm-hmm. So we try to get those done before. And sometimes that causes frustration to the client, but we try to get the mandated ones done first where we can. PEI Agriculture Insurance Corporation, their fiscal year end is March 31st. Typically, they're done by June 30th. This year, they were impacted by the malware, and
Right.
we didn't get their information till late October, November. So they will not be in the Blue Books this year, but typically they're done by June 30th. Mm-hmm. The PEI Civil Service Superannuation Fund, it has a March 31st year end, and it is currently in arrears, and I'll come back to that in a second. PEI Crown Building Corporation, it's a March 31 year end, and it's typically done by June 30th. PEI Grain Elevators Corporation, it has a July 31st year end, and typically we don't get those financial statements completed till March 31st to April 30th, sometimes even a little bit later. And that client has expressed some concern about getting their statements earlier. December 31st it's an important date for them because payments to farmers based on inventory levels at December 31st get paid out to the farmers. So they're wondering if there's a way for us to get those statements done by December 31st. We have a meeting with them tomorrow to discuss that. It's difficult for our office because public accounts are typically October 31st, and then we're into our annual report and stuff. So it doesn't fall into our schedule very well. So we'll see what we can come up with the client tomorrow. PI Lotteries Commission is a March 31st year end. It's typically done by June 30th. The PEI Self-Insurance and Risk Management Fund, it's a March 31st year end, and it's typically done by June 30th. PEI Teacher Superannuation Fund, it's a June 30th fiscal year end, and it's in arrears, and I'll come back to that. The pension plan for members of the Legislative Assembly, it's a December 31st year end, and it is currently in arrears. So for the three pension funds, the office has been playing catch up on those for quite some time, and it's obviously something I've inherited, and I'd like to try and work my way out of it if I can. So we do have a meeting with them also this week to talk about that. I don't like to see things in arrears, so as much as I can, we'll work towards getting those caught up. And so the pension funds are trusts, so they don't get consolidated into the public accounts. There's a lot of information from the pension funds are included in the notes to the financial statements, but the financial statements themselves aren't consolidated. So that could be one of the reasons why it hasn't been such a priority to get the statements done, is because they're not consolidated with the statements. So anyway, having said that, we're going to work towards getting those caught up and current. The public trustee, it has a March 31st year end, and it's in arrears. And the public trustee is just, it's a small little entity with small staff resources, and it's just a resource issue, I think, with them in getting the information to us in a timely manner. So we're working with them to try and expedite that if we can. And the last one is the Supreme Court of PEI trust accounts. It's a March 31st year end. Typically, it's always done by June 30th. This year, we ran into a bit of a situation with one of their accounts. It was recording trust and non-trust items, so it's taken a lot more work than typical, and it wasn't completed in time for the blue books, so it's in arrears this year.
Just a question, Sid?
Thank you, Chair. So, can you go back to the pension arrears?
Yeah.
So, can you give me a bit more detail? Like, so that's information that's not been provided to you, or is it
with the trust funds or the pension funds?
Yes.
No, like two of them are only a year in arrears, and we're currently working on them. One of them is 2 years in arrears, and they're hoping to get us. We're working on one of them, and they're hoping to get us information for the second one. They're saying by the end of this month, but even into February, and we may try and do a 2-year audit at once. We want to talk to them about that, so I'm hoping that we can get back on track by next year.
Sid?
But the holdup is information to your office. It's not your office.
Sometimes it kind of comes back to that comment I made about the status of women, because they're not consolidated in public accounts. We try to get as much of the other mandated stuff done first, so it's probably a little bit of both. Some of it is the timeliness of the information from them, but some of it does fall back on us also.
Sid?
So when you say sometimes and possibly, what are the exact cases for these three? Like where is the...
We have a meeting with them this week to kind of discuss that. So one of the things I've asked, obviously this is my first go-around of the reporting, so I'm trying to get a handle on that myself. But I have asked one of our senior auditors to put together for me a timeline of when we request information, how quickly they respond back to us. So I haven't gone through that yet. We meet on Thursday, so I'm getting together with him on Thursday morning to kind of review that. So I'll have a better idea on Thursday for that specific question. So I really can't, I'd be just speculating at this point.
Sid?
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Great, thanks, Darren.
Okay. So just an update, I submitted the budget for our office for the upcoming year to the Legislative Audit Committee. And I did put in a request for additional dollars for 3 new auditors. And it has been approved by the Legislative Audit Committee. So until the House sits and it receives formal approval, I really can't advertise for those positions, but I hope early spring to be able to get some new auditors hired, and it'll help us hopefully with meet some of these deadlines and provide additional resources to do some additional performance audits as well. So appreciate the fact that they did approve some additional money in light of the year that we're having. It was appreciated that they acknowledged our work. So. So the second bullet there, so once we get the full staff contingent in place, and if the entities were giving us the information within the 30 days, only at that point would I be able to make an assessment whether we could even get all the work done on time. So we're going to work towards that, get enough people, and then if we can get the information on time, then we'll be able to make an assessment, can we meet these deadlines? So I think we should be able to, but until we get to that point, I really can't make that conclusion. And the last point on that slide was, I took the position on May 27th. So the June 30th, just a couple of weeks into my role, I could see that some of these June 30th deadlines weren't going to be met. So I was asking questions, what are the consequences of not meeting these deadlines? And there really wasn't any significant consequence, which is probably why there's not more of a priority placed on meeting those deadlines. So I was a bit surprised that there was no real consequence, other than, I guess, the embarrassment of not being in the blue books. But so I'm not sure, I don't have a recommendation on how to fix that, but that was a bit of a surprise to me, being new to the role. And I do think that the Public Accounts Committee, you are doing a good job of singling out entities that are missing the reporting, so I think that's going to help. And I also feel that with the Legislative Assembly sitting earlier, that when the House sits in April, May, the accounting departments for the different departments, they're kind of on call for the minister. Yeah. So when we're asking them for information, we're not a priority for sure. So if the sitting is done in March or by the end of March, then that April they should be available to help us more and dedicate more time to the financial statement. So I anticipate some improvements there, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Can I just ask a quick question? So that was the finish of that section. Sydney, I just wanted to ask, you had asked the questions about the pension plan and they haven't had that meeting yet. Would you want to see an update after that meeting as to what the status is?
You're leading the witness, Your Honor.
What's that?
You're leading the witness, Your Honor.
Oh, No, I just wanted to make some decisions around, is there anything that we wanted to, have after that section was completed? Is there anything that's outstanding before we move on? I didn't mean to lead you. Go ahead, Sid.
Yes, I guess I would have asked Darren the next time he comes in for sure, but I mean, I can officially, ask for I'm not sure,
I can
Darren.
report back after a meeting, just to.
Ask for a written report.
Discussions
We're
with
gonna be back here.
Anyway, so I wouldn't mind just asking at that time. I don't need you to go to the work of writing a separate report or letter on your meeting. Perhaps we could just have it on the agenda just for an update at our next
Okay,
meeting, if that's okay with you.
great, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate
Yeah, no problem. And was there any other thoughts or in that section from that update? The only one that the penalties for not meeting the timelines, that was the only thing that kind of triggered my thoughts. And I guess, if things are getting better, then there would be no need to trigger a penalty of any sort. But I would wonder what other jurisdictions do in that case, right? If there is a chronic issue of not meeting the timelines and not getting it submitted. And so I was just wondering, would the committee want to see any information around that, or do we just want to see if the departments catch up or the Crowns catch up? Carla?
I actually, that same question jumped into my mind, what other jurisdictions are doing. And like the Auditor General said, if we are noticing that kind of being on top of it and talking about it contributes to them getting in it on time, there wouldn't be any need. But it would be nice to have that information on hand so that if it doesn't help, then we can maybe look at what other jurisdictions do and what may work here, would be my thought on that.
Okay. Any discussion from the committee on that? Does anybody, go ahead, Carla.
I just had another question, so.
Yeah? Oh.
Well, so on the last slide, you were talking about moving some of the audits from your office and having the flexibility to choose which ones would stay and which ones would go. And I'm wondering if there's how you would make those decisions, if there's any kind of framework or criteria, or is that just kind of in your head right now as a possibility?
It's just in my head right now as a possibility. Okay, obviously we have staff that I want to keep busy, and some of the smaller audits, you might think, does the Office of the Auditor General really need to do those? But those are good audits for new staff that we bring in so that we can train them and they can get used to our policies and processes and all of that stuff. So it's hard to just easily pinpoint which ones can stay, which ones can't. I would like to see the pension fund stay with our office. So I really want to work towards getting those up to date. Other than that, there's really no preference as to health. I think is an important one that our office should continue to do also. But and just to give you a bit of an idea, when I met with the other Auditor Generals in Atlantic Canada in November, we talked about kind of this subject. And New Brunswick, we do 12 audits outside of public accounts, our office. New Brunswick does 7, and Nova Scotia do 5. So all the other audits are done by private firms. So that's could be where we end up going to, but I'd like to try and work towards seeing if we can do them or not.
Carla?
And just out of curiosity, would they be staffed similar to us here in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia?
No, they have more additional staff.
Carla?
Thank you, Chair, that's good.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. What's that? Yeah. So just to kind of wrap up on the other, on the penalty side, is the committee in agreement for Ryan to go out and just do a quick audit, jurisdictional scan to see what other jurisdictions do? Okay. Carla?
Sorry, just one more quick question. So with the hiring of 3 new auditors, would that put us more in line with New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, or would we still kind of be
we'd still be behind them, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll let you continue. Go ahead if there's no other questions.
Okay,
Thank you.
so our annual report, we will meet our legislative deadline of March 15th. We will be reporting our annual report. And one of the items that was talked about at your planning meeting was the carbon tax. And we will have a separate chapter on the carbon tax in our annual report, so I won't really speak to it at this point. We're still doing some audit work on what we've been provided. But we will report on that separately. Okay, COVID. So we wanted an update on COVID. So as the first bullet says there, so we were asked on April 10th to do a special audit on COVID programming and support payments for the period starting March 13th, 2020, with a report back to Executive Council no later than August 1st of 2021. So as you're aware, the COVID programs continue to expand and evolve, so our audit has evolved as well. We've now taken it into 3 phases, which we met with Executive Council in November just to kind of get their approval on our approach, which they did give us. So we hope to report on phase 1 by June, so before August 1st, so either late May or June. And phase 1 will basically deal with programs that had an August 31st cutoff date, because the eligibility dates have been met and we're able to complete our work on those programs. Some of the other programs extend beyond August 31st, and they either fall into phase 2 or phase 3. And at this point, I don't know when we'll be reporting on phase 2 or phase 3. It'll depend on kind of how those programs evolve. And it's possible that we could report on phase 3 before we report on phase 2, just depending on how the programs evolve. Guys, go to the next one, Sherry. So this just gives you an idea of, for phase 1, a breakdown of the programs. So on the I guess, just go back one. So for phase 1, there's 21 programs with total expenditures of $51.5 million. And so go to the next slide, Sherry. So this slide kind of breaks down the departments as a percentage of kind of where the monies were allocated. So the 2 main departments are Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture at almost 52%, and Innovation PEI at approximately 23%. So that's where the majority of the phase 1 work is being done. And on the COVID work, typically our office does our follow-up work at 3 years after our audit. With the COVID, we're going to do an annual follow-up on our reports, just to stay on top of it.
Okay, question from Rob.
So when you're doing your audit on the contingency funds of the departments, does that also include the federal money that's come to those particular departments to be administered? You're basically following up on what the expenditures that they made, or just the money that's provincially allocated, or is it both? I guess.
It's based on what was approved through Treasury Board through the Emergency Contingency Fund for the $51.5 million. So that's what we're basing it on. So.
Rob?
So that would tell me that's just the provincial allocation then? Because I mean, the province has gotten probably over $500 million from the federal government, and a lot of that is money that they are spending, but you're not counting that at all?
What's been approved through Treasury Board minutes, yeah.
Okay, Rob?
Just to clarify that.
Good,
yeah.
okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Okay, so reporting timelines. With the changes to the Act in the spring sitting this year, I'm hoping to issue a report in February on our performance audits that we've done this year. One of the main reasons, it's hard in this first cycle to get to that point where we can release some reports early, but I find that the annual report is just so big that it can intimidate people and they might not read it in detail. So I'd like to kind of separate those. So we're working towards releasing a report in February. Joint follow-up report on Atlantic Lottery Corporation. That's an audit that was completed back in 2016, I believe. And we were hoping to release that on February 4th. However, there's been an election call in Newfoundland.
All right.
And because that's a joint report with the Atlantic provinces, we can't table it while the election has been called. So that'll be released sometime later in the spring, I guess, at this point. And the annual report of our office will be, like I said, it'll be done by March 15th. Okay, Sherry? Okay. So I guess I already mentioned this. So phase 1 report for COVID, we hope to get that issued late May or June. Phase 2 and phase 3, at this point, I'm not sure on the reporting. And just a note there that in the future, as we complete performance audits, we're going to release the report right away. We're not going to wait and keep them all for the annual report. So hopefully over the next, it'll probably take 18, 24 months to have regular reports coming out. But that's my idea, is to have, 4 or 5 different reports a year come out.
Right.
Okay. So the next few slides, there's only 2 slides left. The office is currently working on a 4-year performance audit work plan. And just wondering if there's any areas of interest that this committee has that they'd like us to consider in our work plan. Just for input, not to say that we're going to do it, but just if there are areas that you'd like us to consider, then we can put that onto our agenda to talk about. And we can talk about that later. I'll finish up here. And with the annual report, the financial information that gets discussed, to me, I'm a CPA and I understand financial information, but I find it very cumbersome what gets reported. So if there's any suggestions that you might have as to what would be more relevant to members of the Legislative Assembly and to just Islanders at large to better understand the information that we present, I'd appreciate any feedback you can give us. And then the last slide, when I listened to your planning meeting a couple of weeks ago, I know Ryan did offer his services to do some research for you and maybe provide you with specific questions that you want to bring up at these hearings. I think that's a great idea. And I think it'd be very useful if, for example, if you were calling us in and you had specific questions, that you give us those questions in advance so that we can provide a meaningful answer, so that we don't have to say, we have to get back to you. At this point, we can answer the specifics of your question. So I think that would be quite useful. And the last item on the slide is our work plan for 2021-2022. So Crown Lands and property tax arrears are 2 audits that we're kind of deferred this year because of COVID. We just didn't have enough staff to work on those. We have done some preliminary work, so they are in process. COVID-19 audit, it will continue into the foreseeable future. And the last two are new, and those departments were notified on Friday that they're going to be audited this year. So Health PEI, we're going to look at wait times for certain procedures. I'm not 100% sure on the scope of that work yet until we get in and have a look and see what information is available. But the province of Alberta did a wait time audit on MRI procedures a few years ago, and it was very interesting, so I thought I'd kind of expand it here to see how we compare. And the last one is environment, water and climate, looking at their measurable targets versus achieved results so far. So that's on our agenda for this year.
Great. So there's a lot for us to unpack there. There's a couple questions that's been asked of the committee. So the first one would be any input for the work plan of the 4-year audit plan of the office. Does anybody have any initial thoughts that comes to mind? Or is...
And you know, that's kind of like what Sid mentioned. We're going to meet a few more times, I'm sure, in the next little while. If as a committee you wanted to come up with some suggestions that you can bring up at a later date, that's fine too.
Okay. Rob?
So just to get back to, so you're going to do some more on the COVID, but I'm still a little, wondering a bit. So then who does the audits for the COVID spending that of the federal money? Is that the federal Auditor General that would deal with that totally? So what about when it comes to issues that the province, so I'll use the example of vaccines were first going to be most likely paid for by the province, but now the federal government has come up and said that they're going to pay for that. So that would change the contingency fund dollars that are available. Is there a lot of leeway for the department to take those monies that were normally going to be spent for the vaccines and put them to other resources or other items? And how's the check and balance come in that regard, I guess?
You take that into
account?
That's tough. It's a tough question, Rob, because our scope is so limited, like it's so focused on what's been approved and what's been spent. Like, we're not looking at where it's coming from, or it's just really, was it authorized properly, and did the people that received the money, were they eligible to receive the money? So it's a very focused scope. We didn't get into kind of the source of the funding.
Rob?
Well, I'm just sort of saying, when departments outline contingency funds, obviously it's a moving target. It's a contingency. You don't know exactly where you're going to be spending it on. But when there's those kinds of decisions that get made by the federal government that is going to impact on the size of the need for that contingency fund to possibly be that way, it would be kind of nice for us to know that. That they've gotten a windfall on, say, the vaccine funding where they didn't expect that. So that allowed them the leeway to take some of those contingency funds and put them to something else. That's the kind of information I'm kind of wondering. Do you see that as relevant information to us?
If the government does make decisions on federal money to allocate it to provincial programs under the COVID, then it may fall under phase 2 or 3 within our audit. It just depends. Like a lot of the contingency that's been approved hasn't been spent. Like they haven't determined if they're going to spend it or not. So as those decisions get made, then that's why it's hard to say when we're going to be able to report on those phases, because it continues to evolve. So it's just a hard question to answer.
Rob?
I appreciate that, but I think if another one I just look at here is that for the return to school funding, they got $10.3 million from the federal government to that. Yet their contingency fund was probably out before that. So once again, does that give them more leeway? And that would be a positive thing, I suppose. Yeah. But just from an accounting perspective, it would be kind of good to know that they took money that they thought they might have to do to return to school and got federal money. So now I can take this other money and put it to something else.
Yeah. It just falls outside of the scope of the work that we're doing. Yeah.
It's just good to know.
Yeah.
Corey?
Thanks, Chair. So simply looking at the money that was approved in March, April, May? Or, because in the budget in the summer, there was a contingency fund for each department if needed. Will your office be looking at that, or just what was passed through Treasury Board?
So there's 3 Treasury Board approvals, and I think the contingency fund was one of those.
They were all, like, the emergency contingency fund is just phase 1, and there was 3 Treasury Board approvals. The last one was April 22nd for that, so that's phase 1. Like, the programs we're looking at in phase 1 would cover those approvals. Does that answer your question?
Corey?
So when we passed the budget in, I think it was July, so like health, or Department of Health had, I don't know, say $20 million allocated as contingency for COVID if needed. So would you be looking at that as well, or just?
We'll only look at it if there's actually spending associated to it.
Corey?
So you're not limited exactly to what Executive Council asked you to?
Well, we are, although if they actually make a decision that they're going to announce a new COVID program under this spending, then it might fall underneath what we've been asked to do.
Corey? Anybody else? Okay. So is there anything else, Darren, that you'd like to discuss? I know you've left us with some things to discuss, and I don't know if if any member has any input right now, or around the input into the work plan, as well as, sorry, I'm going back to, can you go back to the second last slide, Sherry, if you don't mind?
So there's either input into our performance audit work plan
Yes.
for the future, and
And the additional annual report input.
some of the commentary in our annual report in terms of explaining the public accounts a little bit more clearly for members and for people at large.
Okay, so is there any initial thoughts on the annual report? Corey?
I'd say maybe the committee can discuss it at our next meeting,
Yeah?
or think of some ideas and come back with, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, we could put that on our agenda.
Yeah.
If everybody's in agreement,
That
we
way
could
we
put
can-
those 2 topics on.
Kind of brainstorm and
Okay.
come back.
Everybody in agreement with that? Okay, that's great. Appreciate you giving us the opportunity to
Okay.
have some feedback if we have any, and we will discuss it. Ryan, we don't meet next week, but we are meeting with the Department of Finance, so I think that's February 9th, is that
Yes.
correct? Okay, so if we could add that to our agenda.
Sure. And I do, so I have a strategic advisory committee for our office.
Oh,
and
interesting.
Once we finalize our 4-year work plan, I do plan to make it public as to the different performance audits that we're going to do in the future. I'm not going to identify the year, but I'm at least going to identify what we're going to look at. And it's going to be tentative. It's obviously subject to change based on what's priority of the day. With the anticipation that might make some departments kind of have a look before we get there and try to clean things up a little bit more, so that when we get there, we're not always seen as the bad guy. At the end of the day, we're trying to make things better, so
Yeah.
knowing that we're coming, that might help us.
And the Strategic Advisory Committee, that's something new for your office, is that correct?
Yeah, so when I took the position, because of COVID, we had weekly calls with all the Auditor Generals across Canada. And most other jurisdictions have advisory committees that they meet 4 or 5 times a year just to talk about work plans or review reports before they get released.
Right.
So I borrowed the terms of reference from the AG of New Brunswick, and we have a committee. We've met 3 times now. There's only 2 members on the committee presently. I'm hoping to add a 3rd late this spring, and a 4th maybe by the end of this calendar year. And I'd like to keep it at 4 on the committee.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that's a great addition to the office. Any other thoughts before Sid?
So Darren, would the two of you have decided, like the two extra ones we see in there, like the one on environment, water, and climate change, and the wait times? Is that where those two suggestions came from?
Well, so as an office, we put together a complete list of potential audits. So I met with the Strategic Advisory Committee on Friday last week to review chapters of our upcoming report for February to get their input on, and they provide input, but they also challenge our findings just to make sure that what we're going to report reflects our work properly. So they did, as a group, there's 3 directors on that committee with the advisory committee, so we did kind of formalize that plan, and we kind of approved a tentative 4-year work plan, and I asked for their input on whether we should disclose that right away or wait. And we decided that we would disclose it. I just didn't want to disclose it today. I will disclose it though, probably the next time we meet, but I just didn't want to do it today.
Okay. Sid? Okay. Just for the committee's reference, when you're looking at entities to do an audit on, what kind of criteria are you looking for when you select or when you put forward ideas of who you think a performance audit, who would be a good candidate for a performance audit?
Well, there's a number of factors that come into it. Some would be, we get complaints to the office from the public, so we keep that on file, and if there's a recurring theme, that might be one that we would look at just because of the interests. But typically you would try to find areas that are large enough that are going to have a significant impact on just lives of islanders typically. That, for example, the health PI wait times. Before I took this role, one of the biggest things you would hear was how long it takes to get a hip replacement or knee replacement. So that's one of the areas that affects people's lives. So we want to look at that. So there's sometimes it's how it affects lives. Sometimes it's the actual dollar amounts involved. Whether if it's very material, then it might be something to look at. Some of the departments, it's more governance related. If they're overseeing a significant amount of public money, then sometimes we'll go in to look just to make sure that their stewardship practices are proper.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that context. Okay, so I think is there anything else you'd like to leave us with, or that kind of wraps us up?
I think that pretty well wraps us up.
Great. So on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for coming in, and again, the timeliness of, coming in prepared with the topics that we were looking for updates on. I really appreciate that, and look forward to, I guess February is going to be a busy month for you guys, so we look forward to having some more discussions in the near future. And we'll just take a quick recess before we continue on with our agenda. Thanks. Okay, we'll continue on with item number 4 on the agenda. It is review of correspondence. So you have a package with you right now. So we received a response from Island Waste Management Corporation on their annual report. And just stating that the 2019 annual report will be released prior to the end of January. They ran into some delays in getting the statistical information they required due to COVID. The letters that were sent, so there is a letter that went out to ALC requesting the information on an online casino that was approved by the province via recent order in council. And finally, several of the letters went out to the departments regarding the annual reports not being tabled for at least the 2018-19 fiscal year. And did you want to talk about the other there's 3 letters I think you had said that are outstanding. Did you just want to give a quick summary as to why those ones are held a little bit?
Sure. There are 3 other letters to go out seeking details about annual reports, and it's just they're a little bit different from the letters in that package because they have to do with a former department that did report for the 2018-19 fiscal year, and then its responsibilities were distributed into 2 other new departments, and some other responsibilities from another department were mixed in with it. So the letter essentially has to be a little bit different. And also there are some departments that have responsibility for some reporting entities that haven't gotten their annual reports in, so there are questions about that in those. An example would be the letter to the Deputy Minister of Fisheries and Communities also asks about the Employment Development Agency because that falls under that department's responsibility, and the EDA, as far as I could tell, has not had an annual report table for 2018-19. So essentially, though, I had to redraft 3 letters, and they will be going out after I get the drafts approved, and then you'll have copies of them.
Okay. Any questions on correspondence? Okay. Thanks for doing that, Ryan, and getting those out. Any other correspondence that any members received that they'd like to bring forward? Okay, so number 5 is review of scheduling. So Ryan, I'll just get you to give a quick update on that as well.
Yeah, the next date that I have for you is February 9th. That's when the committee could have a briefing on the Procurement of Goods Act that it requested. The notice hasn't gone out for that yet, but I do have confirmation that that's when Department of Finance and actually Department of Economic Growth, Tourism, Culture will also participate in that briefing, and that's when they can do it.
Okay, thank you. And is there any, so there's a number of others that we're looking at, any tentative dates or anything like that at this point in time?
No, actually, I'm not aware of other briefings right now that the committee is asking for, at least not before the session. I think there was, regarding a review of the public accounts, the committee had agreed to wait till after the sitting to do that. So essentially right now, February 9th is all that's on the docket.
Okay, great. Any comments on that? Okay, so number 6 is new business. Is there any new business that members would like to bring forward? Okay, if no new business, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Carla, thanks. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.